Cale Winters had always prided himself on being forgettable. At 32, he possessed the kind of unremarkable features that made him perfect for diplomatic work. Average height, brown hair that never quite lay flat, and eyes that people described as kind when they were being polite. His specialty in xenolinguistics had taken him to dozens of worlds, but never anywhere that mattered. Until now. The transport ship Aurora's Edge shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace, and Cale pressed his face to the viewport to catch his first glimpse of the Vorthak flagship Dominion's sword. The massive vessel stretched across the star, fielded like a metallic mountain, its obsidian hull reflecting the distant sun in sharp, angular patterns. Weapon arrays bristled from every surface, a clear reminder that this meeting existed only because both sides had grown tired of the Cold War's stalemate. "Nervous?" asked Captain Rodriguez, joining him at the viewport. "Terrified," Kyle admitted, adjusting his diplomatic uniform for the 100th time. 3 years of preparation and I still have no idea what I'm supposed to accomplish here. The mission briefing had been simple enough in theory. Teach Empress Xivara Thorn about human culture to foster understanding between their species. In practice, nobody could explain how you built bridges with a being whose empire had conquered 17 star systems through pure tactical supremacy, who had never lost a battle, and who reportedly made decisions based solely on cold logic. The docking procedure took an hour, every movement carefully choreographed to avoid triggering the automated defense systems that could vaporize the human ship in seconds. When the airlock finally cycled open, Kyle stepped into a corridor that hummed with alien technology. The walls themselves seemed alive, pulsing with veins of blue energy that provided both light and an unsettling organic feeling to the otherwise sterile environment. His escort, a tall Vorthak warrior named Commander Zenith, said nothing as they walked. The Vorthak resembled humans in basic structure, 2 arms, 2 legs, 1 head, but there the similarities ended. Zenith's skin held a subtle silver sheen, and his eyes were completely black, like looking into deep space. Most unsettling were the geometric patterns that shifted across his skin, apparently indicating mood or rank in ways human xenobiologists still didn't fully understand. The throne room doors were 20 feet tall and opened silently at their approach. Cale's breath caught as he entered a chamber that defied physics. The ceiling appeared to be open space, showing real stars wheeling slowly overhead. The floor was polished obsidian that reflected the cosmic display, creating the illusion of walking through the void itself. Empress Xivara Thorn sat on a throne carved from what looked like crystallized starlight. She was smaller than Cale had expected, perhaps matching his own height, but her presence filled the vast chamber. Her skin held the same silver undertones as her subjects, but her patterns were more complex, constantly shifting in hypnotic spirals. Her hair was long and white as moonlight, and when she looked at him, her black eyes seemed to catalog every detail of his existence. "The human diplomat," she said, her voice carrying harmonics impossible for human vocal cords to produce. "You are smaller than I anticipated." Cale had practiced this moment countless times, but standing before the most powerful being in known space, his carefully prepared words evaporated. "Your Majesty," he managed, offering the formal bow he'd been taught. "I am Cale Winters, cultural attaché from Earth. I'm honored by this opportunity to..." Opportunity. She seemed to taste the word. "An interesting choice. My advisors called it a necessity to prevent war. Your leaders called it a diplomatic breakthrough. You call it an opportunity." The patterns on her skin shifted to what might have been amusement. "Tell me, Cale Winters, what do you hope to accomplish that 3 years of formal negotiations could not?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. This was his moment, the reason Earth had chosen him from thousands of candidates, the moment that might determine whether 2 civilizations learned to coexist or eventually destroyed each other. "I hope to show you that humans are more than the sum of our military capabilities or economic resources," he said, finding his voice. "We have art, music, literature, philosophy, ways of understanding existence that might complement your own." Empress Xivara leaned forward slightly, and Cale caught a scent like ozone and starlight. I have reviewed your species' cultural artifacts. Your art appears to be random patterns designed to trigger emotional responses. Your music is organized noise. Your philosophy consists of questions without practical answers. She tilted her head, and the starlight seemed to dim. These things make you weaker, not stronger. Why should I value weakness? It was a dismissal. That would have ended most diplomatic careers, but something in her tone, a hint of genuine curiosity beneath the cold logic, made Cale push forward. Because sometimes, he said quietly, strength comes from accepting vulnerability. Sometimes the questions without answers teach us more than the ones we can solve. For a long moment, the only sound was the subtle hum of the ship's systems. The patterns on the Empress's skin stilled completely. Something Cale's briefings had told him indicated deep thought. Interesting, she said finally. You will remain aboard my ship for the duration of this cultural exchange. Commander Zenith will show you to your quarters. Tomorrow, you will begin demonstrating these supposed strengths that emerge from weakness. As Cale followed the silent commander from the throne room, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just committed to something far more dangerous than anyone back on Earth had prepared him for. Behind him, Empress Zivera Thorne continued to watch the stars wheel overhead, but for the first time in decades, her mind wasn't focused on tactics or conquest. It was focused on a single troubling question. What if the human was right? 3 weeks into the cultural exchange, Cale had failed spectacularly at every turn. His carefully curated presentations on human art fell flat when Empress Zivera analyzed each piece for tactical applications. His selections of Earth's greatest music prompted her to comment that the rhythmic patterns might be useful for coordinating troop movements. Even his passionate reading of Shakespeare's sonnets earned only a clinical dissection of the language structure. Your poetry employs inefficient communication methods, she observed after he finished reciting, Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? They sat in her private study, a smaller chamber off the throne room where holographic displays showed real-time data from across her empire. Why use metaphor when direct statement conveys meaning more precisely? Cale set down his tablet with perhaps more force than necessary. Because the metaphor is the meaning. It's not about efficiency. It's about connection, about making someone feel something they've never felt before. The patterns on Zivera's skin shifted to what he'd learned indicated puzzlement. She leaned back in her chair, studying him with those infinite black eyes. Feel what exactly? Wonder, beauty, recognition of something larger than yourself. He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture that had become habitual during their sessions. When Shakespeare compares his lover to a summer's day, he's not providing meteorological data. He's trying to capture the way love makes the ordinary world seem extraordinary. Love. The word seemed to resonate strangely in her harmonic voice, a biochemical response that compromises rational decision-making. It's also what drives humans to sacrifice for each other, to create art that lasts centuries, to fight for principles instead of just territory. Kyle leaned forward, close enough to catch that strange ozone scent that seemed to cling to her. Your empire is built on logic and strength. But what happens when pure logic encounters something genuinely unpredictable? For the first time since he'd arrived, Zivera's skin patterns stilled completely. Elaborate. Kyle felt his pulse quicken. This was the first real question she'd asked him, the first crack in her armor of dismissive superiority. 3 years ago, during the Kepler Station incident, our commander made a decision that saved 2,000 civilians. Tactically, it was insane. He diverted 3 cruisers from a winning battle to evacuate non-combatants. By every logical calculation, he should have let them die and secured the system. I remember that engagement. Your forces retreated when victory was assured. It was puzzling. The patterns on her skin began to move again, but slowly, as if she were processing something difficult. He made that choice because he'd been one of those civilians once. His daughter was among the evacuees. Logic said sacrifice the few for the many, but love said protect the innocent. Kyle watched her face carefully. You conquered that system. 6 months later anyway, but those 2,000 people are still alive. Their children are growing up. Some of them will probably become artists, or scientists, or parents themselves. Arsivara stood abruptly and moved to the chamber's single viewport. Outside, the stars wheeled in their eternal dance, and for a long moment, she said nothing. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a different quality, softer, more uncertain, so. My first campaign, I ordered the bombardment of a city that had already surrendered. My advisors agreed it would send a message to other worlds considering resistance. She pressed one hand against the transparent aluminum, her skin patterns shifting to colors Kale had never seen before. 50,000 beings died in minutes. The strategic value was undeniable. 7 other systems surrendered without resistance. Kale joined her at the viewport, careful to maintain distance but close enough to see the subtle tremor in her fingers. Do you ever think about those 50,000? Every day. The admission seemed to surprise her as much as it did him. I tell myself their deaths prevented a larger war, saved more lives in the long term. But sometimes I wonder about the children who never grew up, the art that was never created, the love that was never shared. The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of impossible choices and their consequences. Outside, a transport ship drifted past, its lights blinking in steady patterns against the dark. This is why I don't understand your species, Sivara said finally. You make decisions based on these feelings, these unpredictable impulses. How do you build a civilization on such unstable foundations? Maybe that's exactly why it works, Kale said quietly. Maybe the unpredictability is the point. When every choice is a gamble, when love and loss and hope all factor into your decisions, you create something that can't be calculated or conquered. You create something genuinely alive. She turned to look at him then, and for the first time since their meetings began, her expression was unguarded, vulnerable. Show me, she said. Show you what? How you make decisions. Not theoretical examples, real ones. I want to understand how a human mind works when logic isn't enough. The request caught him off guard. I'm not sure I know how to. Tomorrow evening. Join me for the meal cycle in my private quarters, not as a diplomat instructing an empress, but as. She hesitated, the patterns on her skin shifting to something that might have been uncertainty. As one being trying to understand, another, Kale felt something flutter in his chest, anticipation mixed with apprehension. Are you sure that's appropriate? The protocols. I am the ultimate authority on this ship, she said. But there was something almost playful in her tone. I believe I can bend protocol when necessary. As he walked back to his quarters that night, Kyle couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted between them. The Ice Queen, who had dismissed human culture as weakness, had asked him to share a meal. More importantly, she had revealed something of herself, the doubts that haunted her, the weight of decisions made in the name of greater good. For the first time since arriving on the Dominion Sword, Kale felt a flicker of hope. Not for the success of his mission, but for something more personal and infinitely more dangerous. In her private quarters, Empress Zevara Thorn stood before a mirror that showed her own reflection overlaid with tactical data streams. But for once she wasn't reading the reports. Instead, she was studying her own face, wondering when she had stopped seeing the person behind the patterns, and what it might mean that a human diplomat had reminded her she was still there. The Empress's private quarters were nothing like Kale had expected. Instead of the stark military efficiency that characterized the rest of the ship, her chambers were filled with curiosities, crystalline formations that hummed with soft music, sculptures that seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal, and walls that displayed slowly changing patterns reminiscent of abstract art. You seem surprised, Sivara observed as she gestured for him to sit at a small table set for 2. She had changed from her formal regalia into something simpler, a flowing garment that caught the light and moved like starlight across water. I suppose I expected something more tactical, Kale admitted, accepting the seat across from her. This is beautiful. Beauty. She seemed to test the word as she had with love days earlier. These objects serve no strategic purpose. They are remnants of worlds my empire has absorbed. I told myself I kept them for intelligence purposes to understand conquered peoples. The patterns on her skin shifted to something that might have been embarrassment. I think I may have been lying to myself. The meal was unlike anything from Earth, luminescent fruits that tasted like honey and lightning, vegetables that changed flavor as you chewed them, and a beverage that seemed to contain actual starlight. But what struck Kale most was how Zivara ate, not with the mechanical efficiency he'd expected, but with genuine pleasure, savoring each taste as if encountering it for the first time. "Tell me about your first memory," she said suddenly, setting down her cup. "Not your earliest memory, your first memory of making a choice that defied logic." Kale considered the question, twirling his fork through something that resembled pasta but glowed faintly blue. "I was 8 years old. My father had just died, and my mother was working 3 jobs to keep us housed and fed. I found a wallet on the street with enough cash to buy groceries for a month." He looked up to find her watching him intently. "I returned it." "Why?" "Because my father always said that who you are in the dark defines who you are in the light. My mother went hungry that week because of my choice, but she was proud of me. She said I'd chosen to be the kind of person worth being proud of." Zivara's skin patterns had stilled again, and Kale was beginning to recognize this as a sign of deep thought. "Your father's wisdom cost your family resources you desperately needed." "Yes. And it taught me that some things matter more than survival. Some things are worth sacrificing for." He met her gaze directly. "What about you? What's your first memory of choosing emotion over logic?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. She was quiet for so long that Kale wondered if he'd overstepped some boundary. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than he'd ever heard it. "I was very young, barely past my first century. My predecessor, my mother, was dying, and the succession trials were beginning. To claim the throne, I needed to demonstrate my worthiness through combat." She stood and moved to the chamber's centerpiece, a raised platform surrounded by what appeared to be a 3-dimensional star map. "My final opponent was my closest friend, someone I had trained with since childhood." Kale watched as she touched something on the platform's surface, and suddenly they were surrounded by stars. Real stars, he realized. This wasn't a hologram, but an actual window into space, curved around them in a perfect sphere. They were standing in the cosmos itself. "The trial demanded that I kill her," Zivara continued, her voice echoing strangely in the stellar cathedral. "Not defeat, kill. Mercy was seen as weakness, and weakness was not acceptable in a ruler." She moved to stand beside him, close enough that he could feel the subtle warmth radiating from her skin. "I won the combat, but when the moment came to deliver the killing blow, I hesitated." "What happened?" She saw my hesitation and used it to wound me gravely. "I nearly died, and she claimed the victory was hers by right." The stars around them seemed to pulse with her emotion. "The council overruled her. They said my mercy had revealed her lack of honor, and that a true empress would have accepted defeat gracefully rather than exploiting compassion." Kale turned to face her fully. "You won the throne because you couldn't kill your friend. I won the throne, but I lost her forever. She died in exile, believing I had manipulated the situation to appear merciful while ensuring her destruction." The patterns on Zivara's skin had taken on colors Kale had never seen before, deep purples and golds that seemed to echo the nebulae surrounding them. "I learned that day that emotion was a luxury I could not afford. Every choice I made afterward was calculated, logical, efficient." They stood in silence, surrounded by the infinite cosmos, and Kale felt something shift in the space between them. This wasn't the conquering empress or the cold tactician. This was a woman who had spent centuries bearing her capacity for feeling beneath layers of strategic necessity. "Show me something truly human," she said suddenly, turning to face him in the starlight. "Not art or music or poetry. Something that exists in the moment, something that can't be analyzed or replicated." Kale's heart hammered against his ribs. They were standing close now, close enough that he could see the subtle silver of her skin, the way the cosmic light played across her features. "I don't know if I... Please." The word was barely a whisper, and it carried a vulnerability that made something deep in his chest ache. "I need to understand what I've been missing, what it means to feel without calculation." He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and touched her face with trembling fingers. Her skin was warm and impossibly soft, and the patterns there responded to his touch with spirals of gentle light. "This," he said quietly. "This is human. Being terrified and doing something anyway because it feels right instead of safe." Before he could lose his nerve, before logic could intervene, he leaned forward and kissed her. It was gentle, uncertain, the kiss of someone who had never kissed anyone before, who was learning what tenderness meant in the space between one heartbeat and the next. For a moment, Sivara went completely still. Then, to his amazement, she kissed him back. Her lips were soft and tasted like starlight, and when she made a small sound, half surprise, half something else entirely, Kyle felt the universe realign around them. When they broke apart, he expected her to step back, to reassert the distance between Empress and Diplomat. Instead, she stayed close, her hands coming up to rest against his chest. "I don't understand," she whispered. And Kale realized there were tears on her cheeks. Actual tears, silver and luminous in the starlight. "Why does this feel like coming home to a place I've never been?" He reached up to catch one of those impossible tears on his fingertip, watching as it sparkled like captured starlight. "Because maybe," he said softly, "some things don't need to be understood. Maybe some things just need to be felt." Above them, the stars continued their eternal dance, but for two beings standing at the center of the cosmos, time had stopped entirely. In that moment, they were no longer Empress and Diplomat, conqueror and conquered. They were simply two souls who had found something in each other that neither had known they were missing. The change in Empress Sivara was subtle at first, but within days of their encounter in the stellar chamber, even her most trusted advisors began to notice. Her tactical briefings, once models of cold efficiency, now included considerations that seemed to come from nowhere. Questions about civilian populations, inquiries about cultural preservation, concerns about long-term psychological effects on conquered peoples. "Your Majesty," Commander Zenith said during their morning strategy session, his own skin patterns displaying confusion. "You've ordered the delay of the Nexus Prime assault. Intelligence indicates their defenses are at their weakest point in decades." Sivara studied the holographic battle plans floating before her, but Kale could see her mind was elsewhere. They had been meeting in secret for nearly 2 weeks now, stolen hours in her private quarters where they talked about everything and nothing, where she asked endless questions about human experience, and he found himself falling deeper into something he didn't dare name. "What is the civilian population of Nexus Prime?" she asked. "Approximately 2.3 million, but Your Majesty, they are concentrated in the southern continent. Our assault would target only the military installations in the north. And their cultural centers? Museums, libraries, schools?" Zenith's patterns shifted to what Kale had learned indicated deep concern. "Your Majesty, with respect, these considerations are unusual. The strategic value of Nexus Prime lies in its manufacturing capabilities and strategic position. Cultural preservation has never been a factor in our campaigns." Sivara was quiet. For a long moment, her own patterns cycling through colors that Kale recognized as internal conflict. "Prepare alternative scenarios," she said finally. "I want options that minimize civilian casualties and preserve significant cultural sites." After the commander left, clearly disturbed by this unprecedented development, Sivara turned to find Kale watching her from his position near the chamber's edge. Their eyes met across the room and something passed between them. Pride, understanding, and something deeper that made his chest tight. "This is what you meant," she said quietly, "about decisions that can't be calculated." That evening they met in the stellar chamber again. It had become their sanctuary, the one place where they could drop the pretense of formal diplomatic relations. Kyle found her standing at the center of the star field, but tonight, she wasn't alone. Floating beside her was a holographic image of a young Vorthak female, her skin patterns bright with youth and joy. "My friend," Sivara said without turning around. "The one I told you about. Her name was Corvina." Kyle moved to stand beside her, studying the image. Even in holographic form, he could see the intelligence in the young woman's eyes, the way her patterns seemed to dance with life. She was beautiful. She was brilliant. A tactical genius who could have led our people to heights I never imagined. Instead, she died in exile, alone and believing herself betrayed. Sivara's voice carried centuries of grief. "I told myself her death was necessary, that the greater good required her sacrifice. But watching you these past weeks, seeing how you make choices based on hope instead of fear, I wonder if I was simply a coward." Kale reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers. It was a simple gesture, but one that would have been impossible for either of them weeks ago. An empress who had never allowed herself vulnerability. A diplomat who had never dared reach for something beyond his station. "You were young and scared and trying to survive in a system that punished compassion," he said. "That doesn't make you a coward. It makes you human." She turned to look at him, and her expression was a mixture of wonder and pain. "Human? Is that what I'm becoming?" Before he could answer, an alarm began to sound throughout the ship. The stellar chamber's peaceful cosmos was suddenly overlaid with flashing red lights and urgent tactical displays. Commander Zenith's voice echoed through the ship's communication system. "All personnel to battle stations. We have multiple Earth ships approaching on intercept vectors. Your Majesty, your immediate presence is required on the bridge." Sivara's transformation was instantaneous. The vulnerable woman disappeared, replaced by the cold Empress who had conquered 17 systems. But as she moved toward the chamber's exit, she paused, looking back at Kale with an expression he couldn't read. "This changes nothing between us," she said, but her voice carried a note of uncertainty that made his heart sink. On the bridge, the situation was worse than Kale had feared. 3 Earth destroyers had dropped out of hyperspace in perfect attack formation, their weapons already charging. The lead ship was broadcasting on all frequencies, demanding the immediate return of their diplomat. "It appears your people believe you are being held against your will," Sivara said, her voice carrying that terrible harmonic quality that meant she was prepared for battle. "They are demanding your return within 1 hour, or they will consider this an act of war." Kyle stared at the tactical display, his mind racing. Someone on Earth had decided the cultural exchange was a failure, that he was either dead or compromised. The careful balance they had maintained for months was crumbling in real time. "I can contact them," he said quickly. "Tell them I'm here voluntarily, that the mission is proceeding." "The mission is proceeding?" Sivara's voice was sharp, and when he looked at her, he saw that her skin patterns had shifted to something almost aggressive. "Is that what this has been to you? A mission?" The bridge fell silent. Every Vorthak present could sense the emotional charge in their Empress's patterns, the dangerous shift in her mood. Kyle realized with growing horror that his words had triggered something. Doubt, perhaps, or fear that she had been manipulated. "No," he said quickly, but the damage was already done. "Sivara, you know that's not—" "Empress Sivara," she corrected, coldly. "And what I know is that your people have come to retrieve you the moment you gained my trust. How remarkably convenient." The Earth ships were moving closer, their formation tightening for an attack run. On the Vorthak side, weapon systems were coming online, the ship's hull beginning to hum with barely contained energy. 2 civilizations stood on the brink of war, and the woman he had come to love was looking at him as if he were a stranger. "Choose," Sivara said, her voice carrying across the bridge with imperial authority. "Return to your people and resume your life as a human diplomat, or remain here and face the consequences of your divided loyalty." Kyle looked at the tactical display, at the Earth ships filled with his own people, then back at the woman whose trust he had earned, and apparently lost in the space of minutes. The choice should have been simple: duty, loyalty, the bonds of species and civilization. But standing there, watching the patterns on her skin shift from hurt to anger to something that might have been hope, he realized that some choices transcended logic entirely. "I choose you," he said quietly. "I choose this, whatever the consequences." For a moment, the bridge was silent except for the hum of weapon systems and the soft sound of Sivara's breathing. Then she nodded once, sharply, and turned to her communications officer. "Open a channel to the Earthships," she commanded. "Tell them their diplomat has requested asylum in the Vorthak Empire. If they wish to discuss terms, they may do so through proper diplomatic channels." As chaos erupted around them, protests from the Earthships, urgent communications from both fleets, the first stirrings of an interstellar incident, Cale felt a strange calm settle over him. He had made his choice not based on logic or duty or strategic advantage, but on something simpler and more complicated than all of those things. He had chosen love. Now he had to hope it would be enough to bridge the gap between two civilizations balanced on the knife's edge of war. The negotiations took 3 days. 3 days during which two fleets faced each other across the void, weapons charged and ready, while diplomats on both sides worked frantically to prevent the incident from escalating into open war. Kyle found himself at the center of it all, no longer just a cultural attaché, but the focal point around which the future of human-Vorthak relations would be decided. The talks were held in the stellar chamber, neutral ground where both sides could meet. Under the infinite cosmos, Admiral Chen from the Earth Fleet sat across from Empress Sivara, their respective delegations arrayed behind them like opposing armies. The irony wasn't lost on Kyle that he had brought them to the one place that had witnessed his and Sivara's most intimate moments. "Mr. Winters," Admiral Chen said, her voice carefully controlled, "you were sent here to facilitate understanding between our species, not to defect to them. Your actions have created an international incident of the highest magnitude." Cale looked across the table at Sivara, reading the tension in her skin patterns, the way she held herself rigid with imperial dignity. They hadn't spoken privately since his declaration on the bridge, hadn't had a moment alone to address what his choice meant for them personally. "With respect, Admiral, I haven't defected," he said carefully. "I've chosen to extend my mission indefinitely. The cultural exchange has been more successful than anyone imagined." "Successful?" Admiral Chen's laugh was sharp. "You've been here 2 months and caused the first military standoff between our civilizations in 3 years. If this is success, I'd hate to see failure." "Perhaps," Sivara interjected, her harmonic voice cutting through the tension. "Success should be measured, not by the absence of conflict, but by the depth of understanding achieved." She touched something on the table's surface, and suddenly the space around them filled with holographic displays. Images of Vorthak worlds, but not as Earth had ever seen them. These were worlds at peace. Cities where art and music flourished, alongside military precision. Children learning in schools that taught both tactical theory and creative expression. Gardens that served no strategic purpose except beauty. It was a side of the Vorthak Empire that no human had ever witnessed. "Your diplomat has shown me that strength and compassion are not mutually exclusive," Sivara continued. "In the past month, I have implemented new policies regarding civilian populations in conflict zones. Cultural preservation protocols that would have been unthinkable before our exchanges." Admiral Chen studied the displays with the keen eye of a military strategist. "And in return? What has our diplomat gained from this cultural exchange?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Cale felt the weight of both civilizations' expectations, the fragile hope that something meaningful could emerge from this crisis. When he spoke, it was with the voice of someone who had found something worth fighting for. "I've learned that the universe is vast enough for different kinds of strength," he said. "That logic and emotion don't have to be enemies. That sometimes the most important discoveries happen not when we're trying to understand others, but when we're willing to let them understand us." He stood, moving to the center of the stellar chamber where the starlight was strongest. 3 months ago, I came here believing I had something to teach. Instead, I learned that real connection requires vulnerability from both sides. Empress Sivara could have kept me at arm's length, treated me as a curiosity or a threat, Instead, she chose to trust me with her doubts, her regrets, her hopes for what her empire could become. The patterns on Sivara's skin had begun to shift, cycling through colors that spoke of emotion held barely in check. "And what do you propose, Mr. Winters?" she asked, though her formal tone couldn't quite mask the underlying tension. "A new kind of alliance," he said, looking directly at her. "Not built on military pacts or trade agreements, but on genuine understanding. Cultural exchange programs, shared research initiatives, joint exploration missions to worlds neither of our civilizations has seen." Admiral Chen leaned back in her chair, studying him with new interest. "And your role in this hypothetical alliance?" "I would serve as liaison," Kale said, "living part-time in both civilizations, helping to build bridges where none existed before. It would require approval from both governments, a formal diplomatic position that acknowledges the unique nature of what we're building here." For a long moment, the only sound was the subtle hum of the ship's systems and the soft whisper of artificial atmosphere. Then Zivara spoke, her voice carrying a note of something that might have been hope. "There is precedent in Vorthak law for what your people might call a cultural marriage, a formal bond between representatives of different species, designed to facilitate understanding and prevent conflict." She met his eyes across the table. "Such a bond would carry full diplomatic immunity and formal recognition by both governments." Admiral Chen's eyebrows rose. "Are you proposing what I think you're proposing?" "I am proposing," Zivara said, her patterns shifting to colors that Kale recognized as nervous determination, "that Mr. Winters and I formalize our alliance in a way that ensures both our civilizations benefit from what we have learned together." The negotiations that followed were complex, involving legal experts from both species, communication with Earth's government, and careful consideration of precedents that had never quite applied to this situation. But as Kale watched Zivara navigate the diplomatic maze with skill that matched her tactical brilliance, he realized something had fundamentally changed in how she approached problems. Where once she would have used pure logic, now she incorporated understanding of human psychology. Where once she would have demanded concessions, now she sought compromise. The woman who had dismissed emotion as weakness was using empathy as a strategic tool, not to manipulate, but to build something genuinely new. 2 weeks later, they stood, again in the stellar chamber, but this time it was filled with representatives from both civilizations. The ceremony was unlike anything either species had ever witnessed, a blend of human and Vorthak traditions that created something entirely unique. Kyle wore formal diplomatic attire, but Sivara had chosen something that bridged both their cultures, a gown that seemed to be cut from starlight itself, its fabric shifting between silver and deep blue like the space around them. When she took his hands, her skin patterns began to glow with gentle light, and he realized this was how her people showed joy. "Do you, Kale Winters of Earth, accept this bond not as conquest or surrender, but as a choice to build something new between the stars?" The Vorthak officiant's harmonic voice resonated through the chamber. "I do," Kale said, and meant it with every atom of his being. "Do you, Sivara Thorn of the Vorthak Empire, accept this bond not as weakness or strength, but as wisdom gained through vulnerability shared?" "I do," she replied, and for the first time since he had known her, her voice carried no harmonic modulation, just pure, human-like emotion. As they kissed to seal their union, the stars around them seemed to pulse with approval. It was no longer the nervous, tentative kiss of their first encounter, but something deeper, a promise, a beginning, a bridge built from understanding and strengthened by love. In the months that followed, their marriage became the foundation for a new kind of interstellar relations. Cultural exchange programs flourished. Joint research stations were established at the borders of both civilizations. Art and music began to flow between worlds that had once faced each other only across the barrels of weapons. Kyle and Zivara split their time between Earth and the Vorthak capital, serving as living proof that differences could be bridged without being erased. In Earth's museums, Vorthak artifacts were displayed alongside human art. In Vorthak academies, human philosophy was taught alongside tactical theory. But the real victory wasn't political or cultural, it was personal. On quiet evenings in their shared quarters, Whether aboard a Vorthak flagship or in a Earthside diplomatic residence, they would lie together under whatever stars were visible and talk about the future they were building. "Do you ever regret it?" Suvara asked one night, her head pillowed on his shoulder as they watched Earth's moon rise through their bedroom window. "Giving up the life you had planned?" Kale traced the patterns that still shifted across her skin, marveling at how they had learned to respond to his touch with spirals of warmth and light. "How can I regret something that led me to you? To this?" She was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice carried the wonder of someone still discovering what love meant. "Before you, I believed that strength came from isolation, that connection was vulnerability. You showed me that the strongest bonds are forged not in conquest but in choice. Above them, the stars continued their eternal dance. But for two beings who had learned to find home in each other's arms, the universe had become not a vast emptiness to be conquered, but an infinite canvas on which to paint the future they had chosen to build together." Their love story became legend. The human diplomat and the alien Empress who rewrote the rules of interstellar relations, not through war or politics, but through the simple act of reaching across the void between worlds and touching another soul. In doing so, they proved that sometimes the most powerful force in the universe isn't logic or strength, but the courage to be vulnerable with someone who sees you not as you are, but as you could become. And in the end, that first kiss, nervous, gentle, transformative, became the moment that changed not just two hearts but the course of galactic history itself.